Welcome to the Star Wars The Canon Explains review of the Star Wars canon from establishment in April of 2014 through the end of 2016. For those who are new to the Star Wars canon, in April of 2014, Lucasfilm and Disney announced that all existing Star Wars stories were to be rebranded under the Legends banner, and only the 6 episodes of the Star Wars saga, plus the Clone Wars TV series, were to remain canon. We are now over 2 years into the establishment of the canon, so let's take a look and see where we are as we review the Star Wars canon timeline from beginning through 2016. The Star Wars saga begins canonically with Marvel Comics' Star Wars issue number 26, the first in a story arc called Yoda's Secret War. The story takes place prior to Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, and is the current earliest narrative that exists within the Star Wars canon. We then move later in time to Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. A few years after the events of Episode 1, Marvel Comics' Obi-Wan and Anakin 5-issue miniseries tells us a tale of master and apprentice as they answer a distress call on a planet in the midst of a crisis. Several years later, we have the events of Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. Following Episode 2, Attack of the Clones, we have the Clone Wars television series, which also includes the animated film of the same name. Please note that the episodes of the Clone Wars were released out of chronological order, but StarWars.com posted the appropriate viewing order to watch these shows. Christy Golden's short story Kindred Spirits, published in Star Wars Insider number 159, immediately precedes her novel Dark Disciple, where we follow the story of Asajj Ventress and Quinlan Vos. Around the same time is the Dark Horse comic series Darth Maul, Son of Dathomir. This series is the only Dark Horse series to be considered canon, as it, along with Dark Disciple, are based on unused scripts from the Clone Wars television show. This is followed by the events of Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. Also between Episodes 2 and 3 is the story arc First Blood from Marvel's Canon comic series, issues 7 through 11. At this time, no direct placement of these stories can be made within the Clone Wars time period. Also, beginning at some point during this era is Catalyst, a Rogue One novel. This book spans beyond the events of Episode 3. The 19 years between Episodes 3, Revenge of the Sith, and 4, A New Hope, is ripe with story possibilities. We start with a stretch of novels and short stories including John Jackson Miller's Orientation from Star Wars Insider number 157, which leads right into Paul S. Kemp's novel Lords of the Sith, featuring a mission that both Darth Vader and the Emperor must undertake together. The Rise of the Empire story collection begins with Melissa Scott's short story Mercy Mission, James Luceno's novel Tarkin, which gives us much depth into this character, John Jackson Miller's short story Bottleneck, and his novel A New Dawn, which shows us how Kanan and Hera met and began working together. This leads us into the era of Star Wars Rebels, beginning with the children's novel Edge of the Galaxy by Jason Fry, where we follow Zier Leonis in the Imperial Academy in Lothal, a character we meet later on in the television series. Marvel's Kanan comic series, issues number 1 through 5, a story arc known as Kanan the Last Padawan, begins by following Kanan immediately prior to Order 66, showing how he survives and how he deals with the destruction of the Jedi. Also in this time period is a standalone short story by Alexander Freed from Star Wars Insider number 154, titled The End of History. Meanwhile, on Tatooine, Marvel's Star Wars issue number 7 features a tale of Obi-Wan Kenobi when he was in exile watching over Luke Skywalker. This is followed up with a story taking place only a year later in Star Wars issues number 15 and 20. E.K. Johnson's young adult novel Ahsoka takes place roughly 1 year after Revenge of the Sith, and starts to fill in this character's history nicely. It does not tie into any of the other stories in this era at this time. I would be remiss not to bring in Lost Stars, a novel by Claudia Gray, which is another case where a Star Wars book spans multiple eras. In this novel, we follow 2 young students through their time at the Imperial Academy on Coruscant, through to serving the Empire, and what happens when one of them chooses to fight for the other side. The story intersects with events from all aspects of the Star Wars universe from this point through the original trilogy. Star Wars Rebels has drummed up quite some excitement with various publishing efforts. There are 4 other original stories published as children's novels, Ezra's Gamble by Ryder Wyndham, and Jason Fry's series Servants of the Empire, which includes the previously mentioned Edge of the Galaxy, plus Rebels in the Ranks, Imperial Justice, and the Secret Academy. Also, at some point in this era of Season 1, we get Michael Kogi's short story Rebel Bluff, featuring Lando Calrissian and Vizago, released in Star Wars Insider number 158. and the short story TK 146275 by Sylvian Nouvelle, found in Star Wars Insider number 166, which dives deep into the mind of a stormtrooper. While this story does cover information in several different time periods, tailgating right after James Luceno's Tarkin, the present tense of the story takes place shortly after the destruction of Tarkin Town, and does take place on Lothal, mixing in with the time and locations commonly found in Star Wars Rebels. Also, Marvel's Canon issues 6 and 12 is concurrent with the events of the television show. The Rebels magazine contains original comics, issues 1 through 6 occurring during the Season 1 timeframe. Season 2 era currently only has 2 issues of the Rebels magazine to add to the narrative of the show. Star Wars Insider number 170 contains the short story The Voice of the Empire, which reaches back into the events of Catalyst and looks forward towards the narrative found in the very first standalone film, Rogue One, A Star Wars Story. Rogue One, for those who are not aware, ends approximately 10 minutes prior to where Episode 4, A New Hope, begins. For only a 3-year gap of time, the period of Episode 4, A New Hope, has become one of the most developed thus far. There are currently 3 miniseries of comics from Marvels that have no real defined placement. Han Solo, featuring the pilot as he undertakes a rebel mission, going undercover in the Dragon Void Run, a famous starship race. Lando, finding him and Lobot up to no good as they try to pay off a debt. And Chewbacca, who has found himself crashed on a planet and helps a young girl free her city from the grips of the Empire. As if the camera kept rolling after the awards ceremony on Yavin 4, Marvel's Princess Leia 5-issue miniseries follows Leia on a quest to round up surviving Alderaanians to preserve the culture of her adopted home planet. Almost as soon as she gets back to Yavin 4, she sends Han and Chewbacca on a mission to save a rebel spy that can be found in Smuggler's Run by Greg Rucka. Alexander Freed writes a short story in Star Wars Insider number 151 titled 1000 Levels Down, about 2 Alderaanian refugees on Coruscant, and The Last Call at Zero Angle from Insider number 156, which shows us the perspective of being a TIE fighter pilot. Next, we have Kevin Hearn's novel Heir to the Jedi, where we follow Luke on one of his first solo missions for the Rebellion, and Jason Fry's The Weapon of a Jedi, where we see Luke in his first lightsaber fight. We then move into Marvel's ongoing series. Star Wars 1 through 6, Skywalker Strikes, follows Luke on a quest to discover how he can train himself in the ways of the Force without Ben Kenobi. Darth Vader 1 through 6, simply titled Vader, follows immediately after Star Wars issue number 3, where Vader goes on a quest to discover the identity of the Force-strong pilot who destroyed the Death Star. They both sync up together in issue 6, but then go on their separate ways for a bit. Star Wars 8 through 12, Showdown on the Smuggler's Moon, follows Luke in his quest to gain secret passage to Coruscant to find the Jedi Temple. And Darth Vader 7 through 12, Shadows and Secrets, sends Vader on a quest to discover Luke's location. Both of these culminate in the first Star Wars crossover of the new era, Vader Down, which follows our hero's first real face-to-face encounter with Vader and his forces. Vader Down number 1 is followed by Darth Vader 13, Star Wars 13, Darth Vader 14, Star Wars 14, and Darth Vader 15. Fitting in here right after Vader Down is the Star Wars Annual number 1, following a rebel operative as he tries to take out the Emperor and fails, and Darth Vader Annual, showing us Vader's first mission to Shutorun, a planet in uprising against the Empire. Afterwards, we have Star Wars number 16 through 19, Rebel Jail, which has Leia, Sana Starros, and Dr. Aphra working together against someone who wants to kill all the rebel prisoners. This enemy is someone we saw in the aforementioned Star Wars Annual. Darth Vader number 16 through 20 follows Vader as he returns to Shutorun, yet again, to resolve a conflict. Star Wars issues 21 through 25, The Last Flight of the Harbinger, follows our heroes as they steal an Imperial Star Destroyer, but are threatened by the vicious Scar Squad, an elite squad of specialized stormtroopers. Darth Vader, issue number 21 through 25, finish up the Darth Vader story as all loose ends are tied up and his position with the Emperor is firmly established. This series is followed up by the new ongoing series Dr. Aphra, the famed archaeologist in her own original story. These all lead into Star Wars Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back. Also from Marvel without defined placement is the Star Wars Annual number 2. Perhaps this one will tie into the main story soon, or remain a standalone. Only time will tell. Leading us into the time of Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back, is Janine K. Spinlove's short story In Brief from Star Wars Insider number 161, which is a tie-in to Alexander Freed's Battlefront Twilight Company. which follows the actions of rebel soldiers through various campaigns against the Empire. A bit sparse right now is the year between Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back, and 6, Return of the Jedi, consisting only of Cecile Castellucci's Moving Target and Jason Fry's short story, The Levers of Power. Finally, we get into the period of time so many are interested in, what happens after Episode 6, Return of the Jedi. In this, the stories are starting to splinter off into all corners of the galaxy. Star Wars Insider number 149, 150, and 160 followed David J. Williams and Mark S. Williams' short stories series Blade Squadron and Blade Squadron Zero Hour, following a fighter squadron during and after the Battle of Endor. Also, we have Star Wars Uprising, the former mobile game that explores the Innoit sector and its Iron Blockade. Jason M. Hugh has given us a short story Turning Point in the pages of Star Wars Insider number 169 and Marvel's Shattered Empire comics, which features Shara Bay, the mother of Poe Dameron, shortly after the Battle of Endor. These all lead into Chuck Wendig's Aftermath. Not only does its main narrative show some of the efforts by the Empire to get its act together, and the New Republic efforts to stomp that out, but it also features several interludes informing us about the happenings around the galaxy. Aftermath is part 1 in a trilogy that is continued in Aftermath Life Debt. Star Wars Insider number 168 contains the short story Blade Squadron Kuwait, which loosely relates to the events of Aftermath Life Debt. Scorched, by Delilah S. Dawson, found in Star Wars Insider number 165, a direct tie-in to the novel by Claudia Gray, Bloodline. We also add the long-awaited one-shot C-3PO, The Phantom Limb, where we finally discover how C-3PO got that red arm. Next is Greg Rucka's novel Before the Awakening, revealing a bit of the backstory on our 3 characters, Finn, Rey, and Poe. From this, we begin to move forward through Poe Dameron's time in the Resistance, through his ongoing comic series. Issues number 1 through 3, Black Squadron, number 4 through 6, Lockdown, 7, The Gathering Storm, and a new arc by the same name in numbers 8 and 9. We also have a collection of short stories that tie into Episode 7, The Force Awakens, including Alan Dean Foster's Bait from Star Wars Insider number 162, Landry Quinn Walker's Tales from a Galaxy Far, Far Away, Aliens, Volume 1, and Delilah S. Dawson's The Perfect Weapon. All of this leads to the conclusion of our timeline with Star Wars Episode 7, The Force Awakens. I hope you have benefited from this look through the Star Wars canon, and as always, thank you for watching. Be sure to subscribe to keep up with all the insight and analysis found here at Star Wars The Canon Explained. You can also follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Leave your comments and questions about this story or any element of the Star Wars canon below. Till next time, may the Force be with you.